Welcome to this acceptance and commitment therapy training. Before you go out and embark on going through the 40 plus videos that I've prepared, I wanted to go through the Hexaflex, the model of the 6 processes around acceptance and commitment therapy. The reason why I want to put this first and forward to you is because this is a process-based practice rather than an individualized component-based therapy. This is really hard to go out and portray in the videos, and hence why you'll see that each one of these core processes will have its own specific training modules associated with it. Don't be fooled by that, however. What I'm trying to do is to explain what the difference is between the different processes, but in actual fact, when you're doing one process, you're more than likely going to be doing another 1 or potentially even another 2 processes at the same time. And that's what this video is about. So let's begin with the Hexaflex. You'll see there are 6 points here. All 6 points are provided for a single process. The first one being experiential acceptance and cognitive diffusion here on the left-hand side. The reason why I say first is because I like to separate the model into 3 sections. The first one being the left side, this relates to acceptance work. The center here in the middle is mindfulness work. And on the very, very end, these ones here on the right-hand side, which is values and committed action, refer to the action side. So it's commitment, acceptance and commitment therapy. So here on the left-hand side, we've got experiential acceptance. Experiential acceptance, also known as just acceptance, is really about coming to live with or coming to expect life as it is. So living with life as it is. Experiential acceptance looks at holding those feelings as they are, the world as it is, and not trying to change it. There's this understanding in ACT that if we go out and fight with trying to change the world, we often go out and recognize there are things in life that are unchangeable. When we meet one of those that's unchangeable, we all ultimately end up having a struggle or a wrestling match. And so rather than going out and trying to avoid or change life, we're suggesting that there might be times that we position ourselves in an acceptance way. So sitting with, making room for those discomforts. There's lots of discomforts in life, and we recognize in this model is that some of them are unavoidable. Moving down to cognitive diffusion, also known as diffusion. This relates to our thoughts. So experiential acceptance primarily relates to what we're feeling and accepting life as it is. Diffusion talks about, in some sense, acceptance of your thoughts. What do I mean by this? Well, we all have thoughts. And in actual fact, we all have thoughts that somewhat come in a river of thoughts or a stream of thoughts. It's almost like a radio is broadcasting all the time these thoughts that come to us. If I were to ask you to just simply close your eyes and think of nothing, the chances are in a few seconds' time you'll recognize that thoughts are arising. Diffusion recognizes there are thoughts coming all the time, and what it promotes is to be able to see the thoughts as they are, meaning seeing thoughts as thoughts, rather than getting involved in the content of the thoughts. So often we might say, let's take a view of looking at the thought rather than looking from the thought. If we can look at the thought, we recognize it's simply a thought I'm experiencing. If I'm looking from a thought, then I take the content of that thought and it goes out and colors the lens of how I see the world. So we look at diffusing, separating ourselves from the content of the thought. Hence why it's called diffusion, almost like decoupling. Then we've got in the center here, the mindfulness work, we've got the present moment. And it is what it says it is. It's trying to hold and stay in the here and the now, in the present moment. Rather than getting caught up in the past, reflecting and reviewing to try and go out and predict the future and possible dangers, things that we're worried about. It almost says, let's drop anchor and take action or observe the world from the here and the now where I am. It's really helpful with grounding, with taking a breath, pausing to be able to, in some sense, feel more stable, to be able to do any of the other processes, or to reflect at the world and consider how beautiful it is, or how much I can appreciate in this situation, or what I'm even able to go out and sit and hold that might be uncomfortable. That's the present moment, dropping anchor, grounding. Here is self as context is one of the harder processes to understand, but it's very much like cognitive diffusion. However, in cognitive diffusion, these are thoughts that arise about the world. With self as context, these are thoughts that arise specifically and directly about you. In some sense, they often come up as I am statements. For example, I am boring. I am not good enough. I am stupid. All of these I am statements, in some sense, really fused, stuck with some type of identity of myself. We are, in some sense, in self as context, practicing diffusing from the conceptualized self. The conceptualized self being the self story. So by diffusing from the self story, I get to take another perspective. We also sometimes call this perspective the observing self, that there's an observer inside that can go out and view, perceive other parts of the self, and that I'm not necessarily, in this understanding, just my physical and just my thoughts. There's another element or another deeper part of me. So that's self as context. Then we move over to values. Now, values are very important in the ACT framework. Values look at what's important to you, what domains in life are also important, but more importantly, and in some sense, an important distinction in the values work is this is also about identifying behaviours that we find as being important for me to go and consider and to develop. So there's a characteristic of this process that I'm trying to look at the quality of the behaviour, not just the area that's important. So an example might be, if an area of friendship is important to me, I would look at what's the value of how I want to be as a friend. So that might be, the quality might be being patient, or being understanding, or going out and trying to be caring, compassionate. These are all qualities of behaviour, and that's kind of what we're trying to understand and trying to put our finger on in that process. And then finally over here we've got committed action. Now committed action, once again in what it says is exactly that. It's committing to a series or a set of actions, or even sometimes a particular action that is in line with our values. So it's almost like value-driven action rather than action that is based on avoidance. Could be avoidance, impulsivity, or potentially even inaction. So this is where I go out and I've got a capacity to start controlling my life, taking charge of my life. Very different to experiential acceptance and diffusion, where we're trying to go out and say, let's accept those things we can't control. Over here in committed action, we are saying, let's go out and take charge of those things we do have control over. And so that's the 6 processes in this model. And what that produces in the very, very middle is psychological flexibility. It's a big word, and there's a lot that we can go out and unpack and kind of consider about what that means. But psychological flexibility is really about us being able to move around these 6 processes in a flexible way, rather than holding any of these processes tightly and rigidly. We ask that we hold them gently. And so what this might look like in an example might be, let's take a young boy who might be concerned that socially he's inept or not good enough, and that he's embarrassing and just doesn't kind of fit in. What we would probably find is this young lad, from an experiential acceptance point of view, would be probably avoidant of social situations, not wanting to go out and socialise. Or if he's able to even get there, he might be avoidant of going out and contributing to a social engagement. He might be fused with thoughts that he's boring or not good enough, or that anything that he's going to go out and say, my apologies, it wouldn't be boring or not good enough, because that would be in the self as context process. What he might think is that anything he says might not be received well, that he's not a member that fits in. If he says something, it might be taken poorly and might be embarrassing for him. And so on that basis, he doesn't go out and contribute. You'll see that there's self as context here that I almost fumbled on a moment ago. That is any thoughts or this conceptualized self about who he is. If this young boy goes out and believes that he is boring, that he's not good enough, we would go out and appreciate that as being a very heavy load, and so we'd want to decouple from that conceptualized self. He certainly wouldn't be in the present moment. The good chance that he'd be monitoring himself in an unhelpful way and kind of fearful of what repercussions might come of this social situation in the future, and so on. His values would probably be not clarified at that point, because there would be confusion, panic, worry, and the like. So rather than being very solid in, I want to connect and I want to contribute and this is how I want to do so, maybe being patient or having courage, he might become afraid and become avoidant. And that's where, rather than committed action occurring, he would become inactive or avoidant. And so what we can see is that when we're doing one process, we're likely to be doing another. Let me explain that. To go out and accept how that situation is, this young man might need to go out and kind of look inside and notice that his heart is beating, he might have pressure on his chest, movement in his stomach, he might feel awkward, dry in the mouth, and the like. Now, to be able to do that, you would almost certainly need to be in the present moment. A non-judgmental perspective of sitting there, standing there, and observing. To then go out and diffuse, for example, going out and recognizing these thoughts and saying, thank you, mind, or I'm having the thought that whatever I'm going to say would be taken as boring. To be able to go out and do that, once again, he will need to go out and be connected, grounded. He might go out and on that basis want to commit to saying something, but in wanting to go out and contribute, wanting to say something, wanting to maybe have a joke himself, once again, his feelings would become heightened and he might notice his chest starting to tighten again. Having said that, to commit to that action, he might draw back into his values and kind of consider that he wants to be a part of the group, and in some sense the type of friend he wants to be is one that's involved, available, caring, humorous and the like. And so there's values, those values are there. And so you can see that all of these processes are working together, and by going out and contributing in that social situation, he's developing that psychological flexibility that would live here in the centre. The alternative is, in wanting to go out and commit to action to say something, he tightens up and feels uncomfortable, and so rather than going out and contributing, he goes out and avoids, he forgets his values, He's certainly not in the present moment. In actual fact, he feels a little bit unbalanced at the time, caught up in either the past or the future. He's very much fused with thoughts about how the world is and whether he can contribute or not. And there's another identity or a reinforcement in his identity that self as context is reverting back to self as content. He sees himself as this conceptualized story about him. So that's the framework, that's the 6 core processes. So when you're going through the training and each of the videos, you will see each of these core processes individually explained. Please, please, please keep in mind the importance of understanding that these all relate to one another. It's just easier to go out and explain them on an individual basis, but this is a process-based therapy. The only other thing that I think would be important to add here right now is at the very, very beginning, don't necessarily try and understand all of these processes at the same time. Do focus on them individually as the training is built, but then maybe come back to this video at the end to revise. Hope you enjoy the program.